By 1980, America spent $3.3 billion chasing ghosts through Pac-Man's neon mazes. The video game boom of the 80s transformed arcades into cultural landmarks and spawned icons like Jumpman, Ms. Pac-Man, and Dragon's Lair. Behind the scenes, design rivalry and risky innovation lurked beneath the shiny surface. How did a decade that promised endless fun bring an industry to the brink of collapse, and who brought it back from the dead? In 1980, Pac-Man arrived in American arcades, instantly standing out from the crowd of shooters and racing games. The creator, Toru Iwatani, set out to make something different, something that would welcome everyone, not just teenage boys. He later explained, "I wanted to create a game that women and couples could enjoy, not just men and boys." Instead of spaceships and explosions, Pac-Man offered a bright maze, a simple goal, and a hero who wasn't violent or intimidating. The character's shape, often said to be inspired by a pizza with one slice missing, also drew from the Japanese kanji for mouth, a playful, friendly circle designed to eat, not fight. The approach worked. Pac-Man didn't just fill arcades. It spilled out into breakfast cereals, lunchboxes, t-shirts, and even a Saturday morning cartoon. The song Pac-Man Fever climbed the Billboard charts. By the end of 1980, Americans had spent $3.3 billion on video games, with Pac-Man leading the charge. Magazines covered the craze, and kids swapped tips on playgrounds. Pac-Man's appeal crossed age and gender lines, turning a simple maze game into a pop culture event. For the first time, a video game character became a household name, showing companies that a well-designed mascot could be as valuable as the game itself. In 1981, a new kind of challenge landed in American arcades. Donkey Kong, created by a young Nintendo designer named Shigeru Miyamoto, introduced players to a world that was more than just a maze or a shooting gallery. Instead of chasing dots or blasting aliens, players now had to guide a tiny figure, Jumpman, up a series of platforms, dodging barrels and climbing ladders to rescue a damsel in distress. Every level brought a new twist, with shifting obstacles and changing layouts. The action was fast, but the real hook was the sense of progression. Each screen felt like a new chapter, not just a repeat of the last. Donkey Kong's cabinet quickly drew crowds. The game's bright graphics and cartoonish characters stood out, but it was the gameplay that kept people coming back. For the first time, a video game character had a name, a job, and a purpose beyond scoring points. Jumpman, who would later become known as Mario, became the face of Nintendo's ambitions in America. Miyamoto's design set a new standard. Games could tell a story, offer multiple stages, and build tension with every climb. American arcades snapped up Donkey Kong machines, and the game's success proved that players wanted more than just repetition. They wanted adventure and personality. Nintendo, once a small player outside Japan, suddenly had a hit that captured imaginations on both sides of the Pacific. With Donkey Kong, the platformer was born, and the seeds of a global mascot were planted. In 1982, arcades buzzed with a new sensation, Ms. Pac-Man. But behind the flashing lights and catchy music, the story was anything but simple. Ms. Pac-Man didn't start at Namco or even with Midway, the American license holder for Pac-Man. Instead, it began in a college dorm room in Massachusetts. A group of MIT students, calling themselves General Computer Corporation, GCC for short, had built a modification kit for Pac-Man. Their version, dubbed Crazy Auto, offered new mazes, smarter ghosts, and a quirky character with legs. The mod breathed fresh life into a game nearly everyone thought they'd mastered. Midway, hungry for a sequel to keep Pac-Man's momentum going, struck a deal with GCC. After legal wrangling with Namco over rights and royalties, Crazy Auto became Ms. Pac-Man. Released in early 1982, she quickly became a phenomenon in her own right, offering more variety, dynamic gameplay, and a female protagonist who appealed to a broader audience. But the business side was messy. GCC, Midway, and Namco all wanted credit and a share of the profits. Lawsuits and royalty disputes dragged on for years, with each party fighting for a piece of one of arcade history's biggest hits. Ms. Pac-Man's runaway success proved the value of iteration, but also exposed the industry's growing pains, where innovation sparked not just excitement, but fierce legal battles over who owned the fun. In the summer of 1983, a new machine appeared in arcades, a cabinet that looked more like a movie poster than a game. Dragon's Lair, created by former Disney animator Don Bluth, promised something no other arcade game could: full motion animation, as vivid and fluid as a Saturday morning cartoon. Instead of pixelated sprites, players guided the Knight Dirk the Daring through hand-drawn dangers, every move a gamble between dazzling rescue and instant doom. Behind the scenes, the leap was as risky as anything on screen. Bluth and his team poured over $1.3 million into the project, a staggering sum for a single arcade title. To cover the cost and the custom-built Laserdisc hardware, arcades charged 50 cents per play, double the going rate. For a brief moment, crowds lined up, quarters in hand, to see if interactive cartoons were the future. But for all its spectacle, Dragon's Lair revealed the price of ambition. The game's hardware was delicate, expensive to maintain, and the high cost per play meant only the boldest arcades could afford to take the risk. Bluth's vision brought animation and gaming together, but it also exposed how fragile the boom years had become. As the industry chased the next big thing, the stakes kept rising, setting the stage for a reckoning just around the corner. By the early 1980s, the arcade boom was spilling into living rooms. The Atari 2600, once a marvel for bringing arcade action home, now faced a growing crowd of competitors. Mattel's Intellivision promised sharper graphics and a more sophisticated controller. ColecoVision entered the race with arcade-style visuals that seemed almost futuristic for the time. Each new system arrived with aggressive ad campaigns. Families gathered on shag carpets, parents and kids smiling side by side, all drawn in by the promise of endless fun at home. Television commercials pitted consoles against each other, boasting about more colors, more games, more realism. Catalogs filled with glossy pages of joysticks and cartridges landed in mailboxes just in time for the holidays. But beneath the excitement, something was changing. The floodgates had opened for third-party publishers, companies with no connection to the hardware makers, who saw a gold rush in cartridge sales. In 1982 alone, dozens of new names appeared on store shelves: Activision, Imagic, Parker Brothers, and a swarm of others. Some, like Activision, hired former Atari engineers and built a reputation for quality. Many more rushed out games as quickly as possible, hoping to cash in before the next big thing arrived. Retailers, eager to fill their shelves for the busiest shopping season of the year, snapped up inventory from anyone promising a hit. By Christmas, the choices were dizzying. Shoppers found racks crowded with games, some packaged in bright, inviting boxes, others with generic artwork and little to distinguish them. For every standout title, there were a dozen forgettable ones. Family-friendly advertising painted video games as the perfect gift, but parents soon discovered that not every cartridge delivered on its promise. The holiday cycle became a high-stakes gamble. Manufacturers pushed to meet end-of-year deadlines, sometimes cutting corners to get games out the door. Quality control slipped. Games arrived with confusing instructions, broken mechanics, or little entertainment value. Unsold inventory piled up in storerooms. Retail buyers, who had banked on video games as the next big thing, now faced a wall of returns and complaints. The industry, once buoyed by innovation and excitement, found itself awash in sameness and disappointment. Intellivision and ColecoVision tried to set themselves apart with exclusive deals and technical upgrades, but even they couldn't escape the wave of mediocrity. The market, once hungry for anything new, was now oversaturated. The sheer volume of choices made it harder for parents and kids to find the gems among the rubble. The pressure to deliver a hit for the holiday rush only added to the chaos as companies scrambled to secure licenses for movies, TV shows, and sports stars, betting that a familiar name on the box would move units regardless of what was inside. Behind the scenes, retail buyers grew anxious. Their trust in the industry began to erode as returns mounted and shelves filled with unsold stock. The promise of a family-friendly entertainment revolution gave way to skepticism. The boom that had filled arcades and living rooms with laughter and light was now teetering on the edge, weighed down by its own success. The next misstep would come not from a lack of ambition, but from trying to do too much, too fast. In the summer of 1982, Atari executives gathered in a boardroom, staring at the numbers. E.T. the Extraterrestrial had just become the highest-grossing film in history. Warner Communications, Atari's parent company, saw a golden opportunity. Within days, a licensing deal was struck for a record $20 million. The catch? The E.T. video game had to be finished and shipped in time for Christmas, less than 5 weeks away. The task landed on Howard Scott Warshaw, a talented designer fresh off the hit Yar's Revenge. He was flown to Los Angeles to meet with Steven Spielberg, who personally approved him for the project. Warshaw accepted the challenge, knowing the timeline was nearly impossible. Atari offered a $200,000 bonus and a trip to Hawaii if he could pull it off. Warshaw worked around the clock, designing, programming, and testing the game almost entirely on his own. He tried to capture the magic of the movie, E.T. collecting phone pieces to call home, dodging government agents, falling into pits, and climbing out again. But the pressure was relentless. There was no time for proper play testing or revisions. The finished game was shipped to manufacturing just days after the code was completed. Atari pressed 5 million cartridges, betting that E.T.'s name would guarantee success. Retailers, still flush with confidence from earlier hits, ordered huge quantities sight unseen. When E.T. hit store shelves, the backlash was immediate. Kids tore open boxes on Christmas morning, only to find a confusing, repetitive game that left many frustrated. Instructions were unclear, and the main mechanic, falling into pits and slowly climbing out, felt more like punishment than play. Word spread fast. Stores quickly found themselves with aisles of unsold E.T. cartridges. Angry parents returned games by the thousands. Atari's warehouses filled with unwanted stock. The company had needed to sell 4 million copies just to break even. In the end, barely a quarter of that moved at full price. The rest were marked down, bundled, or sent back. The damage went far beyond a single title. Retailers, burned by the glut of rushed, low-quality games, pulled back on orders for all video game products. Consumer trust collapsed. Industry revenue, which had peaked at $3.2 billion, would soon plunge by more than 97%. Atari, once the face of American gaming, posted record losses. Warner sold off the division, and the company that had dominated living rooms only a year before was left in ruins. The E.T. fiasco became a symbol of everything that had gone wrong. But the story didn't end with empty shelves. In the spring of 1983, Atari quietly loaded truck after truck with unsold cartridges, not just E.T., but dozens of failed games and consoles, and drove them to a landfill in Alamogordo, New Mexico. The site was covered with concrete, and the legend grew. Millions of E.T. games buried in the desert. For decades, the tale was dismissed as urban myth, until a 2014 excavation unearthed the evidence. Broken cartridges, faded boxes, and the unmistakable green label of E.T., confirming what many had suspected all along. For Howard Scott Warshaw, the fallout was personal. he became the face of the industry's collapse, his name forever linked to its most infamous failure. In interviews years later, he described the experience as devastating, a career derailed by impossible expectations and a market spinning out of control. The crash wasn't caused by one game alone, but E.T. stood as a warning of what happens when business decisions outpace creativity and quality. By the end of 1983, video games were written off as a fad, and the industry had reached its lowest point. The boom was over, and only something radically different could restore faith in the promise of play. Nintendo entered the American market in 1985 facing a wall of skepticism. Retailers remembered the mountain of unsold games from just 2 years before and wanted nothing to do with another console. To break through, Nintendo's US launch team reimagined the family computer as something entirely new, the Nintendo Entertainment System, or NES. The design was deliberate, a gray, boxy exterior, more like a VCR than a toy, and not a hint of the word video game on the front of the box. Inside, the system came bundled with something no one expected: ROB, the Robotic Operating Buddy. ROB was more than a gimmick. It was Nintendo's ticket to shelf space in toy aisles, not the electronics section retailers wanted to forget. The NES Deluxe set included ROB, the Zapper light gun, and 2 games, Gyromite and Duck Hunt, making it feel like a new kind of plaything, not a risky leftover from the crash. But even with the robot, stores were wary. Nintendo's answer was to guarantee every piece of inventory. For the October 1985 test launch in New York, the company shipped just 50,000 units and promised to take back anything that didn't sell. They handled store displays, trained staff, and ran in-store demos themselves. If a console broke, Nintendo covered the cost. If games didn't move, they'd haul them away. This return policy was unheard of at the time and took all the risk off retailers' shoulders. Nintendo also brought in Worlds of Wonder, the distributor behind Teddy Ruxpin and Laser Tag, 2 of the decade's hottest toys. The message to retailers was clear: stock the NES, or risk losing access to the toys every kid wanted that holiday season. For buyers still on the fence, Nintendo unveiled its final promise: the Nintendo Seal of Quality. Every game cartridge would bear the gold seal, a visible guarantee that it had passed strict reliability and gameplay standards. After years of broken, buggy games, this small emblem became a beacon of trust for parents and buyers alike. The NES's test run in New York didn't sell out overnight, but the steady pace and near-zero return rate turned heads. By the end of the year, the deluxe set was moving off shelves, and Nintendo's return trucks stayed mostly empty. The system's careful rebrand, risk-free guarantees, and the promise of quality had worked. Nintendo had found a way back into American homes, not as a video game, but as the next must-have toy. Super Mario Bros. Arrived in North America in 1985, packed in with nearly every NES console. For many, it wasn't just another game. It was the reason to own the system. At a glance, its world looked simple: blue skies, green hills, a mustachioed plumber darting past pipes and turtles. But beneath the surface, Shigeru Miyamoto and his team had crafted something entirely new. A side-scrolling adventure where the screen moved with you, opening up a landscape far bigger than anything seen before on a home console. Players weren't just moving from left to right, they were learning how to run, jump, and explore with a precision that felt both challenging and fair. The physics were tuned to reward mastery: Mario's momentum, the timing of his jumps, and even the way he slid to a stop all worked together to create a sense of control that was rare for the time. Each level introduced new ideas: moving platforms, hidden blocks, secret pipes. The world was packed with surprises, tempting players to try every nook and cranny. Unlike the short, looping challenges of earlier games, Super Mario Bros. Offered a sprawling quest with 8 worlds, each packed with multiple stages. The continuous scrolling made every journey feel like a real adventure, one that could last for hours, not just minutes. For many, the goal wasn't just to finish the game, but to master it, finding warp zones, perfecting speed runs, and chasing high scores. The game's design encouraged players to keep coming back, pushing themselves a little further each time. This sense of discovery and accomplishment wasn't lost on parents or kids. Families gathered around the TV to take turns, swapping tips and marveling at how much there was to see and do. The game's approachable style and colorful world made it inviting, but its depth kept people hooked long after the novelty wore off. As word spread, Super Mario Bros. Became the NES's killer app, driving hardware sales and turning Mario into a household name. For Nintendo, this was proof that great software could sell hardware. The NES wasn't just another toy. It was a gateway to new worlds, powered by the creativity of designers who believed games could be more than a passing fad. Super Mario Bros. Set a new standard, not just for platformers, but for what video games could be: expansive, rewarding, and endlessly replayable. The side-scrolling revolution had begun, and with it, the golden age of home gaming. In 1986, Nintendo released The Legend of Zelda for the NES, offering something players had never seen before: a sprawling world that didn't just scroll left or right, but opened in every direction. Instead of a set path, Zelda handed players a sword and invited them to wander forests, lakes, and dungeons at their own pace. The journey could last weeks, with secrets hidden behind every bush and cave. But what truly set Zelda apart was a small, silent revolution inside each cartridge: a coin-sized battery tucked alongside the game's chips. For the first time on a home console, players could save their progress directly onto the cartridge, picking up their adventure right where they left off. This battery-backed memory, known as persistent storage, transformed how games could be played and remembered. Now, a quest didn't have to end when the TV turned off. A child could explore Hyrule after school, save before dinner, and return the next day to continue the adventure. The sense of ownership and discovery deepened. The world felt alive and personal, and finishing Zelda became a badge of honor, traded in playground whispers. A year later, Nintendo's Metroid arrived with a different kind of challenge. Instead of linear levels, Metroid dropped players onto the alien planet Zabes with almost no guidance. The world was a maze of tunnels and hidden paths, demanding exploration and memory. Progress wasn't just about reaction speed. It was about curiosity, patience, and the courage to treat every door. The game's structure was non-linear, rewarding players who mapped the world in their heads or scribbled notes on paper. Items and upgrades could be found in any order, and dead ends often hid new possibilities. In a time when most games could be finished in a single sitting, Metroid's journey stretched for days or weeks, drawing players deeper into its secrets. But Metroid saved its boldest move for the end. After hours of tense exploration and battles, players who finished the game quickly enough watched the hero Samus Aran remove her armor and discovered she was a woman. The twist was subtle but seismic. In an era when nearly every gaming hero was male by default, Metroid quietly rewrote the rules. The reveal sparked playground rumors and magazine debates, but it also suggested that anyone could be the hero, no matter who was holding the controller. Together, Zelda and Metroid redefined what a video game could be. Battery-backed saves and non-linear worlds turned games into lasting adventures, not just quick diversions. Players became explorers, not just competitors, and stories could stretch far beyond the living room. The technical leaps inside these cartridges, tiny batteries, persistent memory, and branching maps were invisible to most, but their impact would shape gaming for decades. As the NES library grew more ambitious, so did its audience, hungry for worlds that felt limitless and stories that belonged to them. In 1988, Super Mario Bros. 3 arrived in Japan, the product of a team determined to push the NES further than anyone thought possible. Shigeru Miyamoto, Takashi Tezuka, and their programmers faced a console built for simpler times, limited memory, modest graphics, and a processor that struggled with anything ambitious. But their vision demanded more. The answer came in the form of the MMC3 chip, embedded right in the game cartridge. This chip introduced bank switching, letting the NES juggle code and graphics in real time. Suddenly, the system could support sprawling worlds, a parade of new enemies, and backgrounds bursting with color and detail. Super Mario Bros. 3 changed the rules. For the first time, players navigated a world map, choosing their route and returning to favorite stages. Each world felt distinct: oversized foes in giant land, airships loaded with cannons, deserts with shifting sands, and icy landscapes that tested reflexes. Power-ups broke new ground. Mario donned a raccoon tail to fly, slipped into a frog suit for underwater agility, and stomped around in a giant green boot. The visuals set a new standard for the NES, with smooth scrolling, crisp sprites, and a split-screen status bar that kept information flowing without interrupting the action. The MMC3's scan line counter allowed the game to draw the playfield and status bar separately, a trick previously reserved for arcade machines. The cartridge itself was a technical feat: 384 kilobytes of program data and 128 kilobytes of character graphics, dwarfing the earliest NES games. Manufacturing costs climbed, but Nintendo pressed ahead. When Super Mario Bros. 3 launched in North America in 1990, anticipation had reached a fever pitch. Commercials aired during Saturday morning cartoons, and the film The Wizard turned the game into a legend before most kids had even played it. Shelves emptied as soon as shipments arrived. The numbers told the story. Over 17 million copies sold worldwide, making it one of the best-selling games of its era. For the programmers, it was a balancing act. Memory mapping, sprite multiplexing, custom animation routines, every trick deployed to make the impossible work. Miyamoto later called it the moment they hit the NES's ceiling. Critics agreed, hailing it as a technical marvel. Super Mario Bros. 3 wasn't just a sequel. It was the NES's crowning achievement, proof that with enough creativity and technical skill, even aging hardware could still astonish. Industry analysts in 1989 tracked a market that seemed almost one-sided. By the end of the decade, the Nintendo Entertainment System accounted for more than 80% of all home console sales in the United States. This figure wasn't just impressive, it was unprecedented in consumer electronics. NES hardware filled millions of living rooms, and its games dominated store shelves, with cartridge sales outpacing all competitors combined. Reports from NPD and retail audits showed that in some months, Nintendo's share of the console market climbed as high as 90%, leaving Sega and Atari fighting over what little remained. Annual sales data painted a clear picture. Out of every 10 home consoles sold, 8 or 9 wore the Nintendo badge. Market analysts pointed to the NES's consistent quality, reliable supply, and a library of hit games as the driving forces behind this dominance. For retailers, the numbers meant confidence. For competitors, it meant an uphill battle. Nintendo's grip on the market set the standard for what a successful console launch could achieve. And its dominance would soon force rivals to rethink their strategies entirely. Arcades still pulsed with life. In the late 1980s, their neon-lit halls echoing with the clash of joysticks and the hum of cabinets. Even as living rooms filled with Nintendo's gray boxes, players flocked to new arcade sensations. In 1987, Street Fighter arrived, drawing crowds with its head-to-head battles and bold, competitive spirit. The game's unique control scheme and larger-than-life fighters set it apart, keeping arcades relevant as a proving ground for skill and spectacle. But the center of gravity was shifting. Home consoles had become the main stage, with the NES claiming more than 80% of the US market by 1989. Sega, watching from the sidelines, was preparing its own challenge. A 16-bit system that promised sharper graphics and faster action. Nintendo, too, was readying its next move. The rivalry between Sega's Genesis and Nintendo's Super Nintendo would soon redefine what it meant to play at home, but the roots of that competition lay in arcades, where innovation and rivalry had always gone hand in hand. By 1989, Nintendo held over 80% of the US home console market, a dominance documented by industry analysts and sales reports. This marked a dramatic turnaround from the 1983 crash, when video game revenues had plunged by 97% and public trust had reached its lowest point. Pac-Man, Donkey Kong, Ms. Pac-Man, and Dragon's Lair proved video games could shape culture, but it was disciplined strategy, like Nintendo's seal of quality and technical innovations in Super Mario Bros. 3, that rebuilt the industry from the ground up. Yet not all records from this era are complete. Much about the internal decisions at Atari and third-party publishers remains in private archives or lost. What is clear is that the 1980s set standards for design, business controls, and global fandom that define gaming today. The decade's boom, bust, and revival are preserved in sales data, court filings, and the lasting icons of the medium.